Get your hands off that handle, ma'am, or you'll be leaving in handcuffs, not on a plane. That was the last thing Vivian heard before the silence in the private terminal became deafening. She wasn't a trespasser. She wasn't a confused tourist. She was the woman who signed the paychecks for everyone in that building. Yet she was being treated like a criminal in her own lobby. They saw a black woman in a hoodie and assumed she was the help. They didn't check the manifest. They didn't check the tail number. If they had, they would have seen the name that was about to end their careers. This is the story of how arrogance met the ultimate owner, and the karma that followed was swift, brutal, and absolutely delicious. The rain at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey was relentless, a grey sheet of water that turned the tarmac into a sleek, dark mirror. Teterboro wasn't like JFK or Newark. It was a sanctuary for the elite, a quiet hub where billionaires, celebrities, and titans of industry slipped in and out of the New York metro area without the indignity of a TSA line. Dr. Vivian Cross adjusted her grip on her leather weekender bag. It was a vintage Hermes, beat up enough to look like nothing to the untrained eye, but worth more than the sedan that had just dropped her off. She was exhausted. The merger with Biovant had taken 3 weeks of 18-hour days in a Manhattan boardroom, and all she wanted was to sink into the beige leather seat of her Bombardier Global 7500 and sleep until the wheels touched down in London. She wasn't dressed for a board meeting. She was dressed for comfort. Charcoal joggers, a cashmere hoodie pulled up against the drizzle, and running shoes. No makeup, no jewelry, except for the small diamond studs in her ears that were currently hidden by her hair. She pushed through the glass doors of the FBO, Fixed Base Operator Terminal, the warmth of the lobby hitting her instantly. The Signature Flight Support Terminal was usually a place of hushed efficiency. There were polished marble floors, abstract art on the walls, and a reception desk manned by staff trained to never say no to a client. But today, the atmosphere felt brittle. Vivian walked towards the main desk. There was one man behind the counter, tall, with a jawline that looked like it had been chiseled out of granite, and a haircut that screamed military precision. His name tag read Brett. He was typing furiously on a computer, a phone cradled between his ear and shoulder. Vivian stopped at the counter and waited. She didn't cough or tap her fingers. She just waited. Patience was a virtue she had learned the hard way during her residency at Johns Hopkins and perfected while navigating the shark tank of biotech venture capital. Brett didn't look up. 2 minutes passed. Vivian shifted her weight. She could see the reflection of the rain sliding down the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. "Excuse me," Vivian said, her voice soft but clear. "I have a departure at 11 a.m. Brett didn't even blink. He continued talking into the phone. "Yeah, I've got the catering order for the Gulf Stream. We need the beluga caviar, not the Savruga. If they mess it up again, tell them I'm sending the bill to their corporate office. Right, bye." He slammed the phone down, sighed, and then finally looked up. His eyes, a pale, watery blue, slid over Vivian's face, down to her hoodie, and then to the bag at her feet. The assessment took less than a second. It was a look Vivian knew intimately. It was the look that said, "You don't belong here." He looked back down at his papers. "Deliveries are around the back, sweetheart," he said, his voice flat. "Go out the double doors, take a left. The kitchen staff will sign your invoice." Vivian didn't move. A small, cold smile touched her lips. "I'm not making a delivery, Brett. I'm flying." Brett let out a short, derisive huff. He picked up a pen and started circling things on a manifest, pointedly ignoring her. "Look, the employee shuttle for the cleaning crew already left. If you missed it, you have to wait for the 12:30 loop. You can't wait in the lobby. Policy. Guests only." "I'm not the cleaning crew," Vivian said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming sharper. "I am a passenger. I have a flight scheduled for 11 a.m. If you would just check the manifest—" "I don't need to check the manifest to know you're in the wrong place," Brett interrupted, finally making eye contact. There was a sneer curling his upper lip now. "This is a private terminal. Do you know what that means? It means charter costs start at 20 grand an hour. It means people who value their privacy and safety. It doesn't mean people who wander in off the street, looking for a warm place to nap. Just then, the automatic doors slid open behind Vivian. A burst of cold air and the sound of rain followed a man in a sharp navy suit. He was carrying a garment bag and talking loudly on a cell phone. He was white, middle-aged, and looked exactly like the type of person who frequented Teterboro. Brett's demeanor flipped like a light switch. He stood up straighter, a bright, obsequious smile plastering itself onto his face. "Mr. Sterling!" "Good morning, sir," Brett called out, completely looking past Vivian. "We have the Citation Latitude fueled and ready. Captain Miller is just finishing his pre-flight checks." Mr. Sterling nodded, barely acknowledging Brett, and tossed his ID onto the counter. "Make it quick, Brett. I'm running late." "Of course, sir. Right away." Brett reached for the ID, his hand brushing past Vivian's arm, as if she were a ghost. Vivian placed her hand flat on the counter, directly on top of the paperwork Brett was reaching for. The slap of her palm against the marble echoed in the quiet lobby. Mr. Sterling stopped talking on his phone. The lobby went silent. "I was here first," Vivian said, staring directly into Brett's eyes, "and unlike this gentleman, I am actually the owner of the aircraft I am flying on. You will process me, and you will do it now." Brett stared at her hand, then up at her face. His face reddened, the veins in his neck beginning to bulge. He wasn't used to being challenged, certainly not by someone who looked like her. "Sir," Brett said to Mr. Sterling, "I apologize for the disturbance. I'll have security remove this woman immediately, so we can get you on your way." "Remove me?" Vivian laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Brett, if you touch that phone to call security, you're going to set off a chain of events that you are woefully unprepared to handle." "Is that a threat?" Brett hissed. He slammed his hand down on a red button under the desk. "Security to the main desk. Disturbance in the lobby. Priority 1. Mr. Sterling looked at Vivian with mild annoyance, checking his Rolex. "Miss, if you're looking for handouts, the bus station is 3 miles east. Some of us have work to do." Vivian slowly turned her head to look at Sterling. "I'm sure your mid-level management meeting in, let me guess, Cincinnati, is very important, Mr. Sterling. But my plane is bigger than your house, and my meeting concerns the acquisition of the company that ensures your life. So I suggest you wait your turn." Sterling's mouth fell open. The security team didn't take long. In a place like Teterboro, security didn't mean a sleepy guard with a flashlight. It meant ex-military contractors or off-duty cops hired to protect the assets of the 0.01%. 2 men appeared from the side corridor. They were bulky, wearing tactical vests over grey uniforms. The lead guard, a man with a shaved head and a name tag reading Garrison, assessed the situation with a bored, aggressive efficiency. "What's the problem, Brett?" Garrison asked, his hand resting casually on his belt near his taser. "She's trespassing," Brett said, pointing a shaking finger at Vivian. "Refused to leave when I told her to go to the delivery entrance. Then she started harassing Mr. Sterling here and making threats against the staff. She claims she owns a jet." Brett let out a laugh of disbelief as he said it, inviting the guards to share in the joke. Garrison turned to Vivian. He stepped into her personal space, using his height to intimidate. Vivian didn't flinch. She kept her chin high, her eyes locking onto his. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification, and then I'm going to need you to vacate the premises," Garrison said. His tone wasn't a question. It was an order. "I have been trying to show my identification to this incompetent manager for 5 minutes," Vivian said calmly. She reached slowly into her bag. "Hands!" Garrison shouted, stepping back and putting a hand on his holster. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Vivian froze, her heart hammered against her ribs, but her face remained a mask of stone. This was the dangerous part, the part where bias turned lethal. She slowly withdrew her hand, empty, and raised both palms to shoulder height. I am reaching for my wallet," she enunciated clearly, "to show you my ID, and my pilot's certification, and the registration for the aircraft sitting at Gate 4. Gate 4, Brett scoffed from behind the desk. The Global 7500? That's the Vanguard Bio corporate jet. That bird belongs to a Swiss holding company. You expect me to believe you own a $70 million aircraft?" "I expect you to do your job," Vivian shot back. "Check the tail number, N750VC. Who is the principal listed on the Vanguard Bio holding agreement?" "I'm not checking anything for a trespasser," Brett spat. "Garrison, get her out of here. She's disturbing the clients." Garrison moved forward. "Turn around, hands behind your back." "You have got to be kidding me," Vivian said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I am Dr. Vivian Cross, CEO of Vanguard Bio. If you put handcuffs on me, I will sue this FBO into the ground. I want to speak to the general manager. Now." "The GM is on lunch," Brett lied smoothly, "and he doesn't talk to vagrants." "Vagrants?" Vivian looked down at her $800 sneakers. "Is that what we're doing today? You see skin color and a hoodie, and you see a vagrant?" "I see a disturbance," Garrison said, grabbing her upper arm. His grip was tight, painful. "Get your hands off me!" Vivian wrenched her arm away. The movement was too sudden. Garrison swept her legs. The world tilted. Vivian hit the polished marble floor hard, her hip taking the brunt of the impact. A sharp cry of pain escaped her lips. Before she could recover, Garrison's knee was in her back, pinning her to the cold floor. "Stop resisting!" Garrison yelled, playing to the cameras, playing to the script in his head that justified violence. "I'm not resisting!" Vivian gasped, her cheek pressed against the floor. From this vantage point, she could see Mr. Sterling stepping back, looking uncomfortable but doing nothing. She could see Brett leaning over the counter, a smug, satisfied grin on his face. "Cuff her," Brett ordered, "and call the local PD. I want her charged with trespassing and assault." "Assault," Vivian choked out. "I didn't touch anyone." "You assaulted my peace of mind," Brett muttered, turning back to Mr. Sterling. "So sorry about this, sir. We get these scammers trying to sneak onto flights occasionally. Usually they're just fans trying to meet a rapper or something. We'll have you boarded in 2 minutes." Vivian felt the cold metal of the handcuffs ratcheting tight around her wrists. The humiliation burned hotter than the pain in her hip. She was one of the most powerful women in the biotech industry. She had pioneered a gene therapy that saved thousands of lives. And here she was, face down on a floor in New Jersey, being treated like trash by a man whose entire annual salary was less than her fuel bill for a one-way trip to London. "You are making a mistake," Vivian whispered, closing her eyes. "A massive, career-ending mistake." "Save it for the judge, honey," Garrison said, hauling her up by the handcuffs. They dragged her toward a small holding room off the main lobby, a glass-walled box usually reserved for pilots waiting for clearance. They shoved her into a plastic chair. Garrison stood at the door, arms crossed. Vivian took a deep breath. She needed to think. She needed her phone. But Garrison had kicked her bag out of reach. Through the glass wall, she watched Brett process Mr. Sterling. She watched the polite nods, the printing of the boarding pass. And then she saw something that made her heart stop. Through the rain-streaked windows behind the reception desk, a massive aircraft was being towed into position at the gate visible from the lobby. It was sleek, white, with a distinctive gold and navy stripe running down the fuselage. It was her plane, the Global 7500. And walking down the steps of the plane, shielding himself with a large umbrella, was Captain David O'Connell, her chief pilot. He was coming into the terminal to find out why his boss hadn't arrived yet. Vivian sat up straight. "David!" she screamed, though the sound was muffled by the glass. Garrison banged on the glass. "Quiet in there!" "That's my pilot!" Vivian yelled at Garrison. "That man walking in. Ask him! Just ask him!" Garrison looked out into the lobby. Captain O'Connell entered through the automatic doors. He looked worried. He scanned the lobby, looking for Vivian, Brett saw him and immediately waved him over. "Captain, can I help you? We're just clearing up a security issue." Vivian watched as Brett leaned in, talking to David, pointing towards the exit, likely telling him some lie about a delay. She saw David frown. He shook his head. He pulled out his phone. Vivian's phone, inside her bag on the floor near the desk, began to buzz. She saw Brett look at the bag. He saw the caller ID. Captain Dave. Brett's face went pale. The blood drained out of him so fast he looked like he might faint. He looked from the phone to the bag, to the pilot standing in front of him, and then, slowly, terrified, his eyes drifted to the glass room where Vivian was sitting in handcuffs. The silence that followed Brett's realization was heavier than the handcuffs digging into Vivian's wrists. It wasn't just a pause in conversation. It was the vacuum created when a reality shatters. Inside the lobby, Captain David O'Connell, a man with 30 years of flight experience ranging from the Royal Air Force to private aviation, stared at the reception agent. He was a man of few words, but immense presence. He was dressed in his pristine uniform, 4 gold bars on his epaulets gleaming under the terminal lights. "I'm sorry," David said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the room. "Did you say you haven't seen her?" Brett stammered. His arrogance had evaporated, replaced by the primitive fight-or-flight instinct of a prey animal caught in the open. There was a woman." "My principal," David said, his tone hardening. "Dr. Cross. She texted me 10 minutes ago saying she was entering the lobby. I'm calling her now, and her phone is ringing right there." David pointed a gloved finger at the battered Hermes bag lying abandoned on the floor behind the velvet rope. Brett swallowed hard. He looked at the bag. He looked at David. He looked at Mr. Sterling, who was still standing there, clutching his boarding pass, sensing that something had gone very wrong. "Is that—" David walked over and picked up the bag. He recognized it immediately. He had carried it up the jet stairs for Vivian 100 times. He looked at the screen of the phone buzzing inside. "This is Dr. Cross's bag." David turned slowly to face Brett. His face was thunderous. "Where is she?" Brett couldn't speak. He just raised a shaking hand and pointed towards the glass-walled holding room. David spun around, his eyes locked onto Vivian. She was sitting on the plastic chair, disheveled, her hoodie askew, her hands cuffed behind her back, guarded by Garrison. "Jesus Christ," David muttered. He didn't walk. He marched. He crossed the lobby in 4 long strides and slammed his hand against the glass door of the holding room. "Open this door, now!" Garrison, the security guard, looked confused. He looked at Brett for confirmation, but Brett was busy looking like he wanted to dissolve into the floor. "I said open it!" David roared. Garrison unlocked the door. David rushed in, dropping to one knee beside Vivian. "Dr. Cross, are you all right?" He looked at the handcuffs, his jaw tightening. "Get these off her, immediately." Garrison hesitated. "Sir, this woman is a trespasser. She assaulted—" "This woman," David interrupted, his voice low and lethal, "owns the plane I fly. She owns the fuel you put in it. And quite frankly, she could probably buy this entire airport if she felt like it. You have handcuffed the CEO of Vanguard Biotechnology. If you don't take those cuffs off in the next 3 seconds, I will personally ensure you never work in security again. Not even at a mall." Garrison looked at Brett. Brett gave a weak, terrified nod. The keys rattled in Garrison's hands as he unlocked the cuffs. Vivian rubbed her wrists. There were red welts forming where the metal had bitten into her skin. She stood up slowly, wincing as her bruised hip protested. She didn't look at David. She didn't look at Garrison. She walked out of the glass box and into the main lobby. The silence was absolute. The other passengers, a few scattered businessmen, a family with a poodle, were all staring. Mr. Sterling was frozen near the counter, his mouth slightly agape. Vivian walked to the counter. She moved with a limp, but her posture was regal. She stopped directly in front of Brett. Brett was sweating. Visible beads of perspiration were rolling down his temples. "Ma'am, Dr. Cross. I had no idea. You have to understand, from our perspective." "From your perspective," Vivian said, her voice eerily calm. "What did you see, Brett?" You didn't look—" He stopped himself, realizing that finishing that sentence was professional suicide. "I didn't look like an owner," Vivian finished for him. "I didn't look like Mr. Sterling here." She gestured to the man in the suit. "Because I'm black? Because I'm a woman? Because I'm wearing a hoodie?" "It was a misunderstanding," Brett pleaded. "Standard security protocol. We have to be careful." "Careful?" Vivian laughed softly. "You weren't careful. You were reckless. You refused to look at my ID. You refused to check the manifest. You refused to listen." She leaned over the counter. "You wanted to humiliate me. You enjoyed it. I saw the look on your face when you told me to use the delivery entrance. That wasn't protocol, Brett. That was power, and you abused it." "I can fix this," Brett said quickly, his hands trembling as he reached for the keyboard. "I'll upgrade your catering. I'll waive the handling fees. We can have you on the plane in 5 minutes. No harm done, right?" "No harm done?" Vivian held up her wrists. The angry red marks were clearly visible. "I have a bruised hip. I have lacerations on my wrists, and I have been publicly humiliated in front of my peers." She turned to David. "Captain, how long until we lose our slot?" "We have 20 minutes, Dr. Cross," David replied. "Good." She turned back to Brett. "I'm not getting on that plane yet. Not until I speak to the owner of Signature Flight Support at this location, and the chief of police." "The police?" Brett squeaked. "We don't need to involve the police. It's a civil matter." "Oh, it was a civil matter when you threatened to arrest me," Vivian said. "Now? Now it's a criminal matter. Unlawful imprisonment, assault, battery, profiling." She reached into a bag, which David had placed on the counter, and pulled out her phone. She dialed a number. "Who are you calling?" Brett asked, panic rising in his voice. "My lawyer," Vivian said. "And after that I'm calling the press. I think the New York Times might be interested in how Teterborough's premier FBO treats minority aircraft owners. Don't you?" Brett slumped against the back wall. The color had left his face entirely. Just then, the main doors opened again. A tall woman in a sharp blazer walked in, looking hurried. It was the general manager, summoned by the silent alarm, or perhaps the sheer magnitude of the disturbance. She took one look at the scene, the terrified desk agent, the security guard looking at his shoes, and the black woman rubbing her wrists next to a furious pilot, and knew exactly what had happened. "What is going on here?" the GM asked. Vivian turned to her. "You must be the manager. My name is Dr. Vivian Cross. Your staff just assaulted me. I suggest you call your legal team. You're going to need them." The drama was far from over. In fact, the karma was just warming up. The general manager, whose name tag read Diane, had the polished, practiced smile of someone who managed crises for a living. She was impeccably dressed in a cream suit that probably cost more than Brett's car, but as she surveyed the scene, the cracks in her composure were visible. "Dr. Cross," Diane said, stepping forward with her hands clasped in front of her, a gesture meant to convey openness, but screaming defensiveness. "I am the general manager of this facility. I am so terribly sorry for this confusion. Please, let's step into my office where it's more comfortable. We can discuss this like civilized professionals." "Civilized professionals?" Vivian repeated, her voice cutting through the lobby like a scalpel. "Your staff just tackled me to the ground. That is the behavior of bouncers in a dive bar, not professionals in a premier aviation facility." "We can certainly review the security footage," Diane said soothingly, inching closer. "But I'm sure we'll find that emotions were running high on both sides. Brett here is one of our best employees. He's very protective of our client's privacy." "He profiled me," Vivian said flatly. "He assumed I couldn't possibly be a client because of how I look. And you are about to make the same mistake he did. Assume that you can talk your way out of this with a voucher for free fuel." I'm not trying to buy you off, Diane said, her smile tightening. But we have protocols. When someone refuses to show ID— I tried to show ID, Vivian snapped. He refused to look at it. Well, Diane sighed, a hint of condescension leaking into her tone. Perhaps if you had been more cooperative initially, we wouldn't be here. But regardless, we want to make this right. I can authorize a full refund of your handling fees for today. Vivian pulled out her phone. Diane, do you know who Richard Steele is? Diane's eyes widened slightly. The civil rights attorney? The very same, Vivian said. He's also general counsel for Vanguard Bio, and he's on speed dial. Vivian tapped the screen and put the phone to her ear. The lobby watched in stunned silence. Richard, it's Vivian. I'm at Teterboro. I've been assaulted by FBO staff. False imprisonment. Physical injury, yes. No, I haven't given a statement yet. Yes, the police are on their way. I need you here, now. She hung up and looked at Diane. He's in Manhattan. He'll be here in 20 minutes by helicopter. I suggest you don't let anyone delete that security footage. At that moment, 2 Teterboro Port Authority police officers walked in, their hands resting on their belts. They saw Garrison, the security guard, and nodded familiarly. What's the trouble, Garrison? The older officer asked. Got a rowdy one? Garrison puffed out his chest, sensing backup. Yeah, Mike. Trespasser. Refused to ID. Resisted detention. She's making a scene. The officer turned to Vivian, his expression bored and skeptical. Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your ID. If you don't have business here, you're loitering in a secure zone. Captain O'Connell stepped in front of Vivian, blocking the officer's path. Officer, she is the owner of the aircraft at Gate 4. The only business happening here is a lawsuit waiting to happen. If you arrest her, you are arresting the victim. The officer looked at the captain's uniform, then at the bruised Vivian. He hesitated. Check the tail number, Vivian said from behind David. N750 VC. Run the registration. It matches my driver's license. If you put handcuffs on me again without checking that basic fact, I will add the Port Authority to the lawsuit. The younger officer pulled out a tablet. He typed in the tail number. He looked at the screen, then at Vivian, then back at the screen. He nudged his partner. Mike, the younger cop whispered. It checks out. Vanguard Bio Holdings. Principal, Dr. Vivian Cross. That's her. The older officer's attitude shifted instantly. He took off his hat and scratched his head. Okay. Well, that changes things. It certainly does, Vivian said. I want to file charges against this man, she pointed at Brett. And this man, she pointed at Garrison. Assault and battery. Now hold on, Diane interjected, panic finally setting in. Dr. Cross, surely we can handle this internally. Arresting my staff? That's going to cause a scene. The scene has already been caused, Diane, Vivian said. Mr. Sterling? She turned to the businessman who was still standing there, watching the train wreck unfold. He tried to shrink into his suit. You saw everything, Vivian said. You saw me attempt to show my ID. You saw Brett refuse. You saw me standing peacefully before they attacked me. Sterling looked at Brett, who was pleading with his eyes. Then he looked at Vivian, who looked like an avenging angel. Then he looked at the police. I saw her try to talk to him, Sterling admitted, his voice quiet. The guy behind the desk. He was pretty rude. He wouldn't look at her papers. Liar, Brett shouted. You said she was annoying you. She was, Sterling shrugged. But she wasn't violent, and she definitely tried to show you her ID. You ignored her. Brett looked like he was going to vomit. Garrison stepped back, distancing himself from the desk. Officer, Vivian said, I'd like to make a formal statement. As the police began to take notes, Diane retreated to her office, furiously typing on her phone, likely trying to call the corporate legal team. But it was too late. The dominoes were already falling. While the legal battle was beginning in the lobby, a much faster, deadlier battle was being waged in the cloud. Sitting in the plush leather chairs of the waiting area, unnoticed by Brett or Garrison during the scuffle, was a 19-year-old named Leo. He was the son of a tech billionaire, waiting for his father's jet to arrive from San Francisco. He was wearing noise-cancelling headphones, but he hadn't been listening to music. He had been recording. From the moment Vivian slapped her hand on the counter, Leo had his phone propped up against his knee, capturing the entire exchange in high-definition 4K video. He caught the sneer in Brett's voice. He caught the moment Garrison swept Vivian's legs. He caught the handcuffs. He caught the revelation when the captain walked in. Leo looked at the footage. It was brutal. It was undeniable. He opened TikTok. He didn't add music. He didn't add a filter. He just added a caption. CEO of Vanguard Bio tackled by security at Teterboro for flying while black. This just happened. #Teterboro #racism Karen #airport freakout. He hit post. By the time Richard Steele, Vivian's attorney, walked through the doors of the terminal 30 minutes later, the video had 50,000 views. Richard was a man who commanded a room simply by entering it. He was wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than a Honda Civic, and he carried a briefcase that looked like it contained nuclear codes. He walked straight to Vivian, ignoring everyone else. "Vivian," he said, taking her hands. "Are you hurt?" "I'm angry, Richard," she said, "and I want their heads." "You'll have them," he promised. He turned to the police officers. "I am Richard Steele, counsel for Dr. Cross. I am advising my client to suspend all further comments until we have secured the security footage from this facility. Officer, I trust you have secured the scene." "We're taking statements, Counselor," the officer said, clearly intimidated. Just then, Diane's office door burst open. She ran out, holding a tablet, looking pale as a ghost. "Dr. Cross," she stammered. "Dr. Cross, please. We need to issue a joint statement, immediately." "Why would I do that?" Vivian asked. "Because," Diane said, turning the tablet around to show them. "It's trending on Twitter. It's on Reddit. TMZ just called the corporate press line." Vivian looked at the screen. There was the video. The angle was low, but the audio was crystal clear. "I don't need to check the manifest to know you're in the wrong place," Brett's voice rang out from the tablet, tinny but unmistakable. Then came the sound of the body slam, the sickening thud of Vivian hitting the floor. "Oh my God," Richard whispered. He looked at Diane with a predator's grin. "A joint statement? Diane, you don't need a statement. You need a priest." "The video has 2 million views," Diane whispered, her voice trembling. "Signature flight support stock is down 4% in after-hours trading. The board is calling me." Vivian took the tablet from Diane's hands. She watched herself being humiliated. She watched herself being treated like a criminal. But instead of shame, she felt a cold, hard resolve. She handed the tablet back. "Tell the board," Vivian said, "that I am not interested in a settlement. I am not interested in an apology. I am interested in change. And until I see it, I am going to let that video burn this place to the ground." Her phone buzzed. It was a notification from LinkedIn. Then another. Then 50 more. Messages of support were pouring in from biotech CEOs, from senators, from other aircraft owners. "Brett," Vivian called out. Brett was sitting on a stool behind the counter, his head in his hands. He looked up, his eyes red. "You wanted to know if I belonged here," Vivian said, her voice amplified by the silence of the room. "The internet seems to think I do. But you? I don't think you're going to be here much longer." The phone at the front desk rang. It was a shrill, demanding sound. Brett stared at it like it was a bomb. "Answer it, Brett," Richard Steele said. "It might be for you." Brett picked up the receiver. His hand was shaking so badly he almost dropped it. "Signature flight support, Teterboro," he whispered. He listened for a moment. His face crumbled. He didn't say a word. He just hung up the phone and stood up. He took off his name tag and placed it on the counter. "I'm fired," he said, his voice hollow. "Effective immediately." "And Garrison?" Richard asked, turning to the security guard. Garrison's radio crackled. "Unit 4, return to base. Surrender your badge and weapon. You are relieved of duty pending investigation." Garrison hung his head. Vivian looked at the two men who had held her power over her just an hour ago. They looked small now, insignificant. "Come on, Richard," Vivian said, turning away. "I have a plane to catch. David, is the jet ready?" "Ready and waiting, Doctor," the captain said, beaming. "Good, let's go to London." As Vivian walked toward the tarmac doors, the police officers stepped aside to let her pass. Mr. Sterling gave her a respectful, almost fearful nod. Diane stood in the ruins of her career, watching the woman she had underestimated walk out the door. But the story wasn't over. The video was just the spark. The fire was about to consume the entire industry. The flight to London was smooth, but the turbulence on the ground was measuring a Category 5 on the PR scale. While Vivienne slept in the master bedroom of her Global 7500, cruising at 45,000 feet, the world below was dissecting the incident frame by frame. The hashtag #TeterboroughWhileBlack was the #1 trending topic globally. By the time Vivian landed at Luton Airport, the CEO of the parent company that owned the FBO chain had issued a public video apology. It was flimsy. He blamed rogue employees and promised sensitivity training. Vivian watched the apology on her iPad in the back of a Rolls-Royce Phantom, driving her into central London. She took a sip of sparkling water, her expression unreadable. "It's not enough," Richard Steele said, his voice coming through the car's speakers on a secure line. "They're offering a settlement. $5 million. They want a non-disclosure agreement. They want the video taken down." $5 million? Vivian laughed. "Richard, we made $5 million while I was asleep on the plane. Tell them no." "What do you want, Vivian?" Richard asked. "We have them by the throat. We can bankrupt the location." "I don't want to bankrupt them," Vivian said, looking out at the passing London streets. "I want to own them." "Excuse me?" "You heard me. The lease on that Teterboro terminal is up for renewal next year, and their stock price has dropped 12% since yesterday. They are vulnerable. Vanguard Bio has a logistics division. We ship time-sensitive organs and medicine globally. We need a dedicated hub in the New York metro area." Richard was silent for a moment. Then a low chuckle came through the line. "You want to buy the FBO that arrested you?" "I want to buy the FBO that arrested me," Vivian confirmed. "And I want to do it before the week is out. Leverage the lawsuit. Tell them I will drop the civil rights suit, which will drag their name through the mud for years, if they sell us the Teterboro lease and operations at a distressed asset price." "That is diabolical," Richard said admiringly. "I'll draft the paperwork." Back in New Jersey, the karma was hitting harder than a sledgehammer. Brett was not just fired, he was famous in the worst way possible. He had been doxxed. His social media was flooded with comments. He couldn't walk into a grocery store without people whispering. The local police, under immense pressure from the mayor's office, had formally charged him with filing a false police report and simple assault. He was looking at jail time, not just unemployment. Garrison, the security guard, had his license revoked by the state board. He was practically unemployable in the security sector. Diane, the general manager, was clinging to her job by a thread, forced to field angry calls from clients who were cancelling their contracts. "If you treat Dr. Cross like that," one billionaire hedge fund manager told her, "how are you treating my wife when she flies alone?" The toxicity of the brand was spreading, and Vivian Cross was the only one with the antidote. 3 days later, Vivian walked into a boardroom in the Shard in London. Opposite her sat the CEO of the FBO chain, flown in on an emergency charter. He looked tired. He looked defeated. "Dr. Cross," he said, standing up, "I cannot express how sorry." "Save it, George," Vivian said, sitting down and sliding a thick folder across the mahogany table. "This is the purchase agreement. Vanguard Logistics takes over the Teterboro facility. We retain the ground crew, the fuelers, the cleaners, the mechanics. They are good people. But management? Gone. Security? Replaced. And the name goes. The CEO looked at the folder, and the lawsuit? Withdrawn with prejudice, Vivian said, and I'll release a statement saying we have reached a constructive partnership that ensures the future of equity in private aviation. I'll stop the bleeding. But you have to give me the keys. The CEO picked up a pen. He didn't have a choice. His shareholders were screaming for a resolution. He signed. London, 6 months later. The rain in London was different from the rain in New Jersey. In Teterboro, it had felt like a cold assault. Here, against the floor-to-ceiling glass of the boardroom on the 72nd floor of the Shard, it felt like a cleansing. Dr. Vivian Cross stood by the window, looking out over the grey sprawl of the city. The Thames wound through the metropolis like a dark ribbon. Behind her, the air in the conference room was so thick with tension, it was almost unbreathable. Seated at the long mahogany table was George Reynolds, the CEO of Apex Aviation, the parent company that owned the FBO chain where Vivian had been handcuffed. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. His tie was loosened, his eyes were bloodshot, and his hands, resting on a stack of legal documents, were trembling slightly. 6 months of litigation had bled Apex Aviation dry, but it wasn't the legal fees that were killing them. It was the silence. The silence of phones not ringing, the silence of empty hangars. After the video of Vivian's arrest went viral, the boycott had been swift and merciless. High-net-worth individuals, particularly those in the entertainment and sports industries, had pulled their contracts. No one wanted to be associated with a brand that had become synonymous with profiling. "Dr. Cross," Reynolds said, his voice raspy, "we have agreed to all your terms. The settlement figure is generous, $5 million. We will issue another public apology. We will fire the entire regional management team in the tri-state area." Vivian turned slowly from the window. She was wearing a cream-colored power suit, the fabric crisp and immaculate. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like an executioner who had already sharpened the blade. "You misunderstand, George," Vivian said, walking toward the table. Her heels clicked rhythmically on the hardwood floor, a sound that seemed to echo like a gavel. "I didn't fly 3,000 miles for a check. I don't need your $5 million. I made that much in stock appreciation while I was having breakfast this morning." Reynolds blinked, confused. "Then, what do you want?" "We're offering you a complete victory." "I don't want a settlement," Vivian said, placing her hands on the back of the empty leather chair at the head of the table, the chair reserved for the victor. "I want the keys." "The keys?" Reynolds asked. "Teterboro," she said softly. "The lease, the facilities, the ground equipment, the fuel contracts. I want it all." You want to buy the FBO?" Reynolds sputtered. "That's our flagship location. It accounts for 30% of our northeast revenue. We can't just sell it." "You can, and you will," Richard Steele, her attorney, interjected from the side of the room. He slid a blue folder across the table. "Because if you don't, we proceed with a federal civil rights lawsuit. We will subpoena every internal email your security team has sent for the last 10 years. We will depose every manager who ever worked there. We will turn your company inside out in discovery. The stock price is already down 40%. Do you think Apex Aviation survives a federal inquiry?" Reynolds looked at the blue folder. He looked at his lawyers, who sat silently, staring at their expensive notebooks. They knew they had no defense. The video was damning. The public sentiment was nuclear. "This is a hostile takeover," Reynolds whispered. "No," Vivian corrected him, sitting down. "This is a rescue mission. I'm saving the employees who actually do the work from the incompetence of the management that ruins them. I'm rebranding. Apex leaves Teterboro. Vanguard Aviation moves in." She took a gold pen from her pocket and tapped it against the folder. "Sign the transfer, George. Sell it to me at the distressed asset value, or I walk out of here Call the New York Times and tell them you refused to enact meaningful change." The room was silent for a long minute. The only sound was the rain lashing against the glass of the Shard. George Reynolds looked at his empire, then looked at the woman he had underestimated. He realized, with a sinking feeling, that she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting to erase his brand from the map. With a heavy sigh, he opened the folder. He picked up his pen. The scratching sound of his signature was the sound of an era ending. Teterboro, New Jersey. The renovation had taken 3 months. When the black Cadillac Escalade pulled up to the curb of what was formerly the Signature Terminal, the building was unrecognizable. The tired grey facade had been repainted a crisp, modern white with navy accents. The signage, illuminated by soft LED backlighting, read, "Vanguard Aviation, Private Terminal." The doorman who stepped forward to open the car door wasn't just a hired hand, he was a partner. Under the new Vanguard ownership model, every employee, from the janitors to the fuelers, had a small equity stake in the location's success. The mood was different. The air didn't smell like jet fuel and anxiety anymore. It smelled like pride. Vivian Cross stepped out of the car. She paused on the curb. The last time she had stood here, she was being dragged out in handcuffs, humiliated, her face pressed against the cold pavement. Today, the automatic door slid open for her before she even reached the threshold. She was dressed down again. Vintage denim, a cashmere sweater, and running shoes. It was a test, in a way. She wanted to see if the culture had truly changed. Inside, the lobby was warm. The intimidating high counter had been replaced by individual concierge pods that allowed agents to step out and greet guests eye to eye. The harsh fluorescent lights were gone, replaced by warm ambient fixtures. Sarah, the new general manager hired by Vivian, looked up from her tablet. She didn't see a black woman in casual clothes. She saw the owner. She saw the boss. "Good morning, Dr. Cross," Sarah said, stepping forward with a genuine smile. "Welcome home. We have the Global 7500 prepped on Ramp 1. Captain O'Connell mentioned you might want the sparkling water stocked, so we added an extra case." "Thank you, Sarah," Vivian said, scanning the room. "How are the numbers?" "Fuel sales are up 15% since the rebrand," Sarah reported, "and we've had 3 major corporate flight departments switch their contracts to us this week alone. They like the new atmosphere." "Good," Vivian said. "Very good." She began to walk towards the tarmac doors, but a movement near the coffee station caught her eye. The floors of the lobby were gleaming. They were polished to a mirror finish, reflecting the new artwork on the walls, and polishing them, with a rhythmic, back-and-forth motion of a heavy industrial mop, was a man in a grey jumpsuit. He was older than the other staff. He looked tired. His shoulders were slumped, and his hair, once cut in a military-style fade, was grown out and messy. He was focused intently on a scuff mark near the skirting board, scrubbing at it as if his life depended on it. Vivian stopped. She knew that posture. She knew the shape of that jawline, even though it was now covered in patchy stubble. It was Brett. The lawsuit and the criminal charges had destroyed him. The plea deal he took for filing a false police report meant no jail time, but it came with a permanent criminal record. In the world of high-end service and security, he was radioactive. He had lost his apartment in Hoboken. He had sold his car. He had applied to dozens of jobs: bartender, bouncer, retail manager. But a simple Google search of his name brought up the video of him sneering, the video of him lying. He had hit rock bottom, and in a twist of irony that only the universe could orchestrate, the only company that had an opening for a night shift cleaner, a company that practiced blind hiring to give people second chances, was the cleaning contractor for Vanguard Aviation. Vivian walked over to him. She didn't walk aggressively. She just walked. The sound of her sneakers stopped near his bucket. Brett saw the shoes first. High-end, limited edition. He froze. He knew he wasn't supposed to interact with the guests. He kept his head down, gripping the mop handle. "Excuse me, sir," Vivian said. Her voice was calm, devoid of malice, but instantly recognizable. Brett's body went rigid. The blood drained from his face. Slowly, painfully, he lifted his head. When their eyes met, the silence in the lobby seemed to stretch for an eternity. Brett looked at the woman standing before him. He remembered the hoodie. He remembered the feeling of power he had when he pressed the alarm button. He remembered laughing as she was cuffed. Now, she owned the floor he was standing on. She owned the roof over his head. She owned the logo on his chest. His lip trembled. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to beg for his job. But no words came out. The shame was a physical weight, crushing the air out of his lungs. He looked at her, terrified that she would snap her fingers and have him removed, that she would take this last, small lifeline away from him. Vivian studied him. She saw the fear. She saw the total defeat. She could have fired him. She could have humiliated him in front of his new co-workers. She could have filmed him mopping the floor and posted it to TikTok. But Vivian Cross was a queen, and queens do not punch down. "The floor looks good, Brett," she said softly. "Keep it that way." She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, clutching his mop, staring at her back as she walked toward the light of the runway. The air outside was crisp. The smell of Jet A1 fuel was perfume to Vivian's ears. Captain David O'Connell was waiting at the bottom of the air stairs. The massive Bombardier Global 7500 loomed above them, a sleek, white predator ready to conquer the sky. The new tail number was painted in bold gold letters, N001VC. David saw her face as she approached. He had seen the interaction through the glass. He knew who the cleaner was. "You're a better person than I am, Vivian," David said as he took her bag. "I would have had him thrown out." "He's in his own prison, David," Vivian said, gripping the handrail. "Every day he comes to work, he has to clean the building of the woman he tried to destroy. Every paycheck he cashes has my company's name on it. That is a punishment far worse than unemployment. That is a daily reminder of his mistake." She looked up at the plane. "Besides, we needed a good janitor, and he always was obsessed with keeping the trash out." "Now he can focus on the actual trash," David laughed, a deep belly laugh that shook his frame. "Ready for departure, boss?" "Ready," she said. Vivian climbed the stairs. She paused at the top, just before ducking into the cabin. She looked back one last time at the terminal. She saw the new sign glowing in the twilight. She saw the diverse team working inside. She saw a world that was just a little bit fairer than it had been 6 months ago. She stepped inside, and the heavy door sealed shut with a reassuring thud. Minutes later, the engines roared to life, a sound of raw, unadulterated power. The jet taxied past the private hangars, past the staring eyes of the other pilots, and turned onto the main runway. As the plane accelerated, pressing Vivian back into a cream leather seat, she took a sip of champagne and watched the ground fall away. The terminal grew smaller. The cars became toys. The people became invisible. She was airborne. She was untouchable, and down below, in the lobby of the empire she had built out of spite and justice, a man named Brett dipped his mop into a bucket of soapy water and continued to scrub the floor, one regretful stroke at a time. So, what is the lesson here? It's simple, but it's one that Brett had to learn the hard way. Never judge someone's worth by their wardrobe, and never underestimate the person standing quietly in front of you. You never know if the person you're disrespecting is the one who signs the checks. Arrogance might make you feel powerful for a moment, but karma is the only thing that flies higher than a private jet. And when it lands hard. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder to stay humble, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.